So just as a brief recap, the last time we began to have a little bit of discussion about God showing favoritism and what kind of favoritism God showed and what type we tend to show. And we noted that there was a distinct difference between the kingdom of man and the kingdom of Yuvah in regards to how we look at each other. And does anybody remember what kind of favoritism God does show to his people? I mean, there's the kind of favoritism that we find where he selects us to be members of his kingdom through no merit of our own. So he's not showing favoritism in that regard. But we noted also, like it's talking about in the book of Philippians, like Epaphroditus. It says you got to hold men like him in high regard. And we read a little passage from Timothy about holding that people of a certain character are to be given double honor. So Yahweh does want his people to honor each other because they are righteous, but certainly not in regards to favoritism because of wealth or social status or something like that. That just doesn't work for Yahweh. Unfortunately, though, we noted that there is a lot of favoritism shown among his followers, that we definitely like to break ourselves up into categories in regard to wealth, class, social status, stuff like that, even by race. I mean, there's a lot of churches that are just African American, a lot of churches that are just white, and people like to divide themselves up like that. And God doesn't do that. He doesn't want us to do that. So, but we do need to honor the true servants among us, just like he honors those who are faithful and obedient. So that's a brief recap of our discussion from, it was 2 weeks ago, yeah. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper into that. Not too much though, but just a little bit. Let's take a look at James chapter 2, and we're going to start in verse 5. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you from I'm calling this Righteous Judgment and the Disadvantaged. Here's James chapter 2, verses 5 through, I think that's 7, excuse me. It says, "Listen, my beloved brothers and sisters, did God not choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? Do they not blaspheme the good name by which you have been called?" So that's the first little section that I want to take a look at with you. You notice that in the previous context that James was talking about a rich person coming into the fellowship, and you treat him different than a poor person who comes into the fellowship. So you can infer that James is talking to the great middle segment of, you can call them middle class people or something like that, because he's talking specifically about how do we treat people who are below and people who are how do we treat people who are above socially, according to man's kingdom. So he is warning us against being judges with evil motives. The problem, as I see it, and we can discuss this, is the judges with evil motives. What do you think those motives might be? Why would the middle class or the pastor. I mean, I assume that most pastors are middle class. Some are poor if they're from a poor area, and some are incredibly wealthy if they front a megachurch or something like that. But what is this evil motives? What would the evil motives be for treating a certain individual with great dignity because of wealth? What would be the motive for that? Hayden, Gracie, please.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is because he might find favor with you and share the wealth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that gets kind of reminds me, like maybe they want the rich to come into the congregation so they can give 10% of their income. That'd be a windfall for the church if you got somebody who was wealthy and was, was on board with tithing. You might be set. Did you want to say something, Jerry?
I had the same thought that you had.
Okay.
Greed.
Yeah.
Money.
Right. So then thinking about it from the opposite direction, what would be the point of saying to a poor person, you sit down over here by my footstool or stand over there in the back? Why treat them in that way? You right?
Basically, because you looking at them like, what am I going to get out of you?
Nothing.
I don't know how you'd word that, but I mean, that's what they're thinking.
Yeah, we have nothing to gain from the poor, and so we don't give them much honor. Jan, Hayden, we got a question from Jan. Did you want to say something, Gracie? I'm sorry, since you got it, go ahead.
Just really brief, because to have someone who is poor, and maybe it'll make you feel elevated to have them looking up at you.
Yes, that can be a bit of an ego boost to be directing the poor hither and yon. Yeah, give that to Jan for me, Hayden.
Unfortunately, because our society is so judgmental, there's a connotation of fear that goes with either low income or homeless or less fortunate people, that maybe they are also a part of something that we should be afraid of. And so people are less inclined to reach out to them. And of course, that's very unkind.
Yeah, absolutely. Good insight. Angela?
And then at the other end of the spectrum is the virtue signal. Like Gracie, was it Gracie that was saying, if someone can see you help the disadvantaged, then it's making you feel better about yourself. Either way, even whether it be the poor or the rich person, you're treating them a certain way because there's some benefit you're getting. You're either getting to feel better about your own righteousness, or you think you might gain something material from them. And the thing with God not showing partiality is it doesn't matter who we are. He doesn't need anything from us. And that's why he can be objective.
He can be objective because he doesn't need anything from us. Yeah, that's a great insight. Anybody from online? Sorry, I didn't look over here. Tracy, did you want to say something?
I was going to say pretty much what Gracie said.
Okay. Yeah, that's oh, sorry, Jimbo.
I remember Lazarus in the grave. He was still telling, the rich man is unnamed, is still saying, hey, tell Lazarus to come help me out. They're both dead, and he's still bossing him around. It's just the way they roll.
Treating him like a servant. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's, there's no place on earth where you can't see a certain way that rich people treat poor people and poor people treat rich people. It's universal. It's particularly pronounced in Western culture, especially in America, because we have a culture that is just so enamored of money and wealth and prestige and power and fame and honor of a different sort. But I want to just bring in a scripture for you from chapter 6 of Luke. If you want to turn there, you can. I'm just going to read it from my tablet here. This is the Messiah Yeshua talking about how we treat others, especially in relation to money. In Luke 6:33 through 35, it says this: if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he himself is kind and to ungrateful and evil men. Yes, indeed. Kind. Oh, there's be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Yeah, there are several more verses, but that ties in really nicely. In fact, James, in just a few verses from where we're reading right now, is going to make a direct reference to that as well.
My brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Jerry decided he was going to listen to the audio Bible here. So, we've got the Messiah Yeshua telling us in no uncertain terms that we are not to view people in that way, that we are to be generous to someone who has no opportunity to be generous to us. And it goes right along with a lot of what he said in the Sermon on the Mount. It also reminds me of the passage in, I don't know that I actually put this in my notes, but you guys probably know what I'm talking about from the book of Leviticus, where it says, you shall not show favoritism to the poor, neither shall you countenance the rich. God does not show favoritism to anyone. Now you might, and we're going to deal with this in just a moment, but you notice here that it says in verse 5, my beloved brothers and sisters, did not God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith? Now that doesn't say that they are better in some way. It says that he has granted them a blessing of faith. Now we're going to talk about that in just a moment, but he can't be saying that he has a special disposition towards the poor, because that would be showing favoritism. And he himself said, you shall not side with the rich nor with the poor in judgment. Now that passage in Leviticus is specifically talking about in judgment and taking bribes and dispensing justice with an equal hand. And we'll deal with that in a moment. But you mentioned previously that why you might show favoritism to a rich person, because they might want to get donations for the organization. They might want to learn from the success of the wealthy. There's always something to be had there. It's like, well, you're wealthy and you've done well. What, you got any wisdom? You got any insight? What can I do? Can you help? You got any stock tips? What do you have that you can share with us? You're always looking at what's in it for you. And Hayden, I'll ask you this question. When we are, because Hayden and I and Evan too have been working on a bunch of copywriting stuff. And we're always focused on one thing when we're writing our title tags and our H1s and our H2s. What are we trying to convey to the reader in the strongest possible terms?
What's in it for them? What
is in it for them, not what is in it for us. So that's hooray for marketing. Yeah. But we really have to focus more and more and more. That is, I think, and we're going to get to this in a minute. I keep wanting to jump ahead because I have some very interesting things that I want to talk about, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. But I just got to say that this is the very heart of Christianity. What's in it for you? Not what's in it for me. That is the way the world is run. What's in it for me? What can I get out of this? That is not the way God's kingdom is run. It is what's in it for you. That's the whole of the Torah and the prophets. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we've already discussed the fact that Yehovah, our Father, doesn't need anything from you. Angela just mentioned that a moment ago. But what he does want is for you to focus all of your efforts on determining what your neighbor wants and needs. That is his primary focus. So, you might have in your mind that you want to get some donations from a rich person who comes into the fellowship. You might want to learn from their success and take on some of their worldly wisdom. In fact, it's an interesting conversation that you want to make a note to yourself in your Bible notes that James has a lot to say about comparing and contrasting wisdom from above versus wisdom from below. He calls one earthly, natural, and demonic, and the other coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no shifting shadow. Okay, so he's spending particular time comparing this wisdom from above versus wisdom from below. And that's one of the things that you might want to get from a rich person who enters the fellowship. Some of that worldly wisdom, which is corrupting wisdom. You might want charity directly. They might want to curry favor and influence with the powerful. You know, it also occurs to me that in relation to verse 6 here, that he starts to talk about being drug into court. And we'll deal with that in just a moment. But it occurs to me that it's possible you know, they might want to gain some type of favoritism from the rich because they have political power. Notice that he mentions going to court here in just a moment, and he's going to spend a little bit more time in regards to that. And them blaspheming the good name by which you have been called. We'll deal with that in a moment, but I'm just looking at and thinking about the motives for why you might treat a rich person in a special way. It's certainly that you want to get something from them, but I'm contemplating what is it that they want? What is it that they're lacking? What is it that they may have lost recently? Who's one?
Nothing. Tracy, the lacking thing. She's got to be jumping out of her.
Go ahead, Tracy. You want to say something?
Thing. Unless you want to just turn the rest of the hour over to her.
She's got
something.
You want she says that Tracy, she knows Tracy has something to say about this. I don't know what she's talking about.
I mean, yeah, this keeps coming up, and I think it's on a lot of believers' minds right now. I don't really know. I'm just thinking about when he says to treat those who treat you poorly, treat them good, don't repay evil, but repay evil with good. And I've been doing a lot of study about when we have a problem with something, it's not something that we necessarily are struggling with, but it's something that we're lacking that's causing that problem. I was telling Angie, something you said kind of got this ball rolling for me was that you can't replace a negative thought, or you can't get rid of a negative thought, you have to replace it with something good. And then I saw a Bible study that was talking about this same concept where it's like, you're not depressed, you're lacking joy. And so then I started seeing this in the scriptures, it's everywhere. And then you see these, even James said it, count it all joy when you fall into trials. And then at the end of that sentence, he says that you may be lacking nothing. And Yahweh says, walk in my ways, and I'll bring you to the land, you'll be lacking nothing. And so this is the idea of seeking first the kingdom of God, and then all these things will be added to you, you'll be lacking nothing. And I was thinking you could even apply that to why he says don't repay evil with evil. Because obviously they have evil, they don't have good. They're lacking good, so give them what they're lacking. So you just kind of have to see this in the whole scripture, And there's just so much to it. I don't know if there's something specific that you said that Angie was talking about, but everything you're saying is going, oh yeah,
That's I think what she was talking about.
The lacking nothing.
Yeah, lacking nothing, right? And you know, you're so right, Tracy. I think we've mentioned 3 or 4 times that this whole book of James is a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. It's just, I mean, some of the Psalms and the Proverbs, which I think is probably what Yeshua was heavily drawing from and talking about when he's giving the Sermon on the Mount. And James, man, there's so many parallels between this and the Sermon on the Mount that you see, you know, like Tracy just said a moment ago about you seek first his kingdom and his glory, and everything that you need will be added to you. This is the wonderful paradox of the Christian faith, which is if you are lacking in your heart, in your mind, in your life, it's probably because you're not giving. You see the dichotomy and the weird, it's totally inverse to what the world is about. It's like if you want your needs met, it's because if you have a lack of needs in your life, it's probably because you are not being generous, helpful, loving, kind. You're not advancing his kingdom, so he may not be meeting your needs. Frankly, that's an uncomfortable thought, considering all the times that my needs haven't been met in my life. And I'm like, that's a very real possibility that I'm not seeking his kingdom, and that may be why my needs are not being met.
So to go back to what Tracy said, if you would say if you are lacking in things, it may be because you lack in generosity.
And generosity, and you might say, well, how can the poor give? Time, talents, resources. There's a lot of things you can give that don't have anything to do with money. So yes, if you are suffering lack, it may be because you're not generous yourself. That's certainly a possibility. The Bible is just replete from statements from Yeshua that talk about how the first will be last, and the whole social system in the kingdom is going to be flipped on its head.
It's amazing.
It is absolutely amazing. It's going to be fantastic. Absolutely. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I think we are brought to hard times to cleave to Yeshua. A lot of people get needs and wants mixed up in this materialistic world.
Yeah.
Matthew 6 says, "Do not worry then, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear?
Mm-hmm.
For all these nations seek that, and your heavenly Father knows you need all these.
Yeah.
But seek first the reign of Elohim and his righteousness, and all these shall be added to you." And that's why there's Psalms that say, I've never seen the righteous beg for bread. And that's what he's doing right now. He's putting believers together, and he's giving the Ruach of Yosef to prepare, because these times coming forward, all this, materialism will be gone, and we'll be in a true wilderness experience.
Very much so. That's very much so. So we have to go ahead, Jan. You can give that to Jan Hayden. So you're absolutely right. I mean, we need to focus on what needs to happen. Go ahead, Jan.
And Ellen, I'm sure you're going there, but as we go back to what we were talking about is what is the curiosity and what is the reason for treating those with wealth better? Obviously, there's a lack involved, which creates the curiosity or the desire to be close or the desire to learn from. Mm-hmm. If our all in all isn't in the Lord, then that exists, that weakness.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're feeling insecure, and that there's a real insecurity that comes, and I think that's a blessing from the Lord in disguise, that you are feeling insecure and you need to suckle up to some rich person to make you feel better about yourself, to try and get something from them.
You're looking to a man.
You're looking to someone other than God for your needs. And that's indicative of all kinds of things.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's very basic. And
it is.
But, it's nothing heavy, deep here. But, if we had $100 million liquid, would we pray that real hard about anything? I don't know. I don't think I would. I don't think I could handle that, It wouldn't be good for my soul. I'm a much better person when I've got a real problem, that I'm concerned about, I can't solve.
Well, and I think that may be because you're like me, Jimbo, is that you can't be trusted. You can't be trusted with much. Tracy?
It goes, I mean, money is really the driving force of all this stuff, but I think a reason why someone would have trouble acknowledging Messiah or not siding with the rich is because of clout. It's like the big companies, the celebrities, that's the many and the few. And so if we take that stance of the minority, all these people are going to turn on you. And some people can't handle that. I think that's a big part of it because we have to be able to take that step for right.
Right. Absolutely.
Because we need the approval of
Men.
instead of
God.
Okay, so we're still looking for man to meet a need, not money now, but
Yeah.
approval.
Well, and that's, yes, not placing your faith and your trust in God is the source of all kinds of problems for believers. That is one of the biggest problems that most believers face in every aspect. And it's the same aspects all the time. Am I trusting God for my health? Am I trusting God with my family, my work, my money, my relationships? Those are the issues that trip us up every time. And so that's the issue. That's the issue that we're continuously facing. Now, we talked just a moment ago about being God. It says here in verse 5 that God chose the poor of this world to be rich in faith. Now, what do you anticipate is being said there? What is the point that he is making here? Because at first glance, if you're not reading it carefully, it can just seem to be saying God chose the poor of this world and didn't choose the rich. And boy, it's easier for a rich man to go through the eye of a needle than for, to enter the kingdom of heaven. So you have a lot. This has been a pretty popular doctrine with Christianity for millennia, that God has a special place in his heart for poor people. And that God favors the poor. Well, okay, so there you get into some, you got to have a little bit of discernment when we're talking. Who are we talking about here? Okay, the rich versus the poor. Are we talking about, Jerry? What are your thoughts on that?
Maybe the poor in spirit, the poor in heart,
the poor in spirit, the poor in heart. Talking about the Beatitudes.
That kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, that's a good insight, and I think that we need to kind of tear this apart and think about, what is it saying? I mean, my first inclination when I read this is to say to myself, well, to me, the Father has given a grace, a blessing to those who are disadvantaged in this world to be strong in faith. Why would that be? Because they don't have anything else to trust in. He's given them something to trust in, which is himself. That is a tremendous privilege for them. That is a tremendous blessing because he does have a very soft spot in his heart. I mean, you can read throughout the prophets and throughout the Torah. It's everywhere that the greatest evil that men can commit is to take advantage of the disadvantaged. He hates that. He hates that more than anything. And I think that is why you are looking at destruction coming across these economic and political systems that we're living under right now. Because they are so skewed in favor of the wealthy and the powerful against the disadvantaged. And I got to tell you, I had to really spend some time with the Father and thinking through these things because, being from that Protestant work ethic, Calvinist type of thinking, you kind of grow up, especially in the West, thinking about, well, You have somewhat of the prosperity gospel thinking where it's like, well, if you're doing well in life and you're being blessed, it's because God loves you more. You're probably being faithful. You also can tend to have this idea that God just prefers poor people to rich people. That's the flip side of that coin. But you have to consider, the weakness of a poor person is trusting in what? What is the challenge of a poor person? What are they trusting in? I mean, God has given them a gift to say, trust in me. I know that you are being downtrodden and stripped of your rights and privileges and whatnot, and people taking unfair advantage of you in this world. Trust in me, and I'll take care of you. You'll have everything you need. Not want, as Brett pointed out, not necessarily want, but need. So you mentioned, I've never seen the rich, the poor children begging for bread, and even though he falls down, he gets up. You know what I'm saying? So the Father is taking care of these people. But what is their challenge? Evan?
Perhaps it's jealousy.
Yes, jealousy. They'll definitely feel jealous because they're like, why can't I get some of mine now? You know how you have to defer, delayed gratification, defer gratification. I'm not going to get mine until the kingdom comes. That's a hard thing to do. Not only that, but they also unfortunately have a tendency to put their trust in other things. What are some things that they might put their trust in?
The government.
Government, absolutely. People can trust in the government, for sure. That is a big challenge for poor people, is to trust in the government rather than God. What else? They can trust in rich people. They can put their trust in rich people. A benefactor.
Popularity.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Popularity. That's a good one.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, peer pressure. You bet. You bet. So it's a special challenge. The Father has a soft spot in his heart for people who are oppressed and downtrodden, but they have a special temptation to trust in other things. We have a lot of echo anytime someone talks offline. Okay. Online. Okay, I see what you're saying, Mike. Hand me that speaker, Hayden. Evan, one of you. So thank you, Mike. I'll take care of that.
I wanted to point out that when we're talking about rich and poor, that we have been really, really hammering home the money or no money thing, but to remind you that rich and poor are words used for the honor and shame idea, and that we're talking about the humble and the proud here too when we're talking about that. And I think that thinking about it that way, when you see poor, it's not just someone who doesn't have stuff. Yeah. It's someone who is humbled either by their circumstances or just you can have someone who has a lot of stuff that is still poor in spirit because they are humble. Yeah. And so when we're talking about how he favors the poor, think about he favors the humble because they recognize that they are lacking something and they need him to fill that hole. Whereas the proud are of the attitude that they lack nothing. And you can be poor and still be proud and not feel like you need anything from anyone.
Right. Yes. Good insight. Good insight. I think we need to take just a moment and identify who are the poor. The Bible's fairly specific about this. Who are the poor? Jimmy mentioned it a moment ago. Widows and
Poor in spirit.
Okay, so we can deal with poor in spirit in a moment, but let's just think about this from a temporal standpoint for a moment. But Angie mentioned poor in spirit, and that's basically an attitude of humility. But think about this. The poor are, as Jimmy mentioned, widows and orphans. What do those two things have in common? Now, there are a couple of others in that. Did anybody know who else goes into that category? Strangers, sojourners. Strangers and sojourners. So you got widows, orphans, strangers, and sojourners. What do these things have in common? They're all vulnerable. They don't have a protector. Children without parents have no protection system.
Terrible trouble.
They're in terrible.
Lacking something.
What's that?
She said they're all lacking something too.
Yes. What is that?
Well, I just mean a widow is lacking a husband. The orphan is lacking a father. A stranger is lacking a home. A sojourner is lacking a country. So it's just, these are all things and places we have once been. Spiritual sense.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the next level of first starting at the Peshat, is understanding who are these literal people, and then taking it to that next level down, Hayden, and figuring out, what does this mean spiritually? These are people who are vulnerable, have nothing else to trust in, and are very potentially being taken advantage of by people who do have those things. Jimbo?
Would a stranger be somebody that doesn't speak the language of the country that they're in, and they're kind of like suffering from Babel?
A perfect example of this, and you said it well. There are thousands and thousands of these people on our southern border who are struggling because, now I think that this is a political issue, that people start thinking politics. I'm not thinking necessarily about politics, okay? You kind of hear some people say, well, those are just people who are looking for a better life. Some of them will say, no, these people are being persecuted. They're fleeing persecution. Well, here's the thing. If you live in one of these countries in South America or Central America, and I don't know if you're aware of what's happening in Mexico, but that is a narco-terrorist state. It's very hard to live in peace in a place like that. Would you flee that place if you could? Yeah. Heck yes, I would as well. Would you cross over? Now, this is a hot button issue because you're like, whoa, illegal immigration. Just like, well, I think we should be welcome. You guys, I want to point out something to you here. Are you aware of what the book of Ezekiel says about Sodom's problem? Now, I know that we have looked at Sodom and Gomorrah, and we like to, the standard Christian trope is, oh, they're all a bunch of homosexuals. That's not what the book of Ezekiel says. They were inhospitable to strangers, and they were wealthy and had an abundance of bread, but they did not care for the disadvantaged. That was the sin of Sodom. Now, am I saying throw open the borders and let everybody from South America come in? Of course not. You can't have a country if you just fling open the borders and let anybody and everybody in. But those people on our southern border, that is who the Bible's talking about. People who are fleeing war-torn places, narco-terrorist states, places that just don't have any opportunity. People in America are not poor. Not according to the standards of the people in Mexico, not according to the standards of the people in South America, not according to the standards of the people in Africa. That's poor. It's really, you have to work hard to be poor in America. We as a church, as a congregation of believers, have offloaded the responsibility of taking care of the disadvantaged to the government. And boy, are they screwing it up. That ain't going well at all. but it makes us feel okay. You've heard that phrase about, it's like if you're driving down a country road in the middle of nowhere and there's an old lady pulled over on the side of the road, broke down, you're going to help her because you're the only person around. But you can see old ladies on the freeway, they stand there for an hour. You know why? Because of deferred responsibility. Everybody who's driving by says, man, there's people all over the place. Somebody's going to help her. And nobody does. You see the problem? So the problem here is these people are disadvantaged in one way or another, whether they're a widow, an orphan, a stranger, or a sojourner. Now, this began to weigh on my mind as I considered who are these poor and disadvantaged people. And I think that you're seeing something in America that is probably been very common throughout history. But we kind of in America had this idea in our minds that we're like, everybody's equal. Everybody's equal before the law. And you get your day in court, and by golly, you can be vindicated and justified. And if you work hard, you can make it. And you know how this is the American ideal, right? How you feeling about that American ideal now?
It's a lie.
It's a lie. Now, was it always a lie?
No.
I don't believe that it was.
It's just being misrepresented.
It is being manipulated. Okay, so we have inequity at law, inequity in social connections, inequity because of, I want to draw your attention to this passage in Isaiah chapter 5. This is I think exactly what and this is one of those things that the Father is really, really unhappy about. Look at Isaiah chapter 5. That's the
chapter before he sees the Lord.
Yeah. Okay, so Isaiah chapter 5, I just want to read verse 8 to you. Woe to those who add house to house and join field to field until there is no more room, so that you have to live alone in the midst of the land. Now that's a strange statement. Joining house to house and field to field until there is no more room, so that you have to live alone in the midst of the land. What is your perception about what is being spoken of here?
I don't want to say his name, but one particular billionaire comes to mind who's been buying farmland up and buying homes up.
Yes.
And not just literally farms, but the same thing with small businesses compared to gigantic ones that are eating them up.
Yes, this is what you're seeing throughout the Western cultures all over the planet, is very powerful, wealthy corporations, conglomerates, the Walmartization of the world, the Amazon. Yeah, so this is what's happening is they're just eating up everything. Now, I'm not making a big societal narrative out of this, but I do want you to be aware of this. You're not as free as you once were. And you really don't have a lot of freedom. You are becoming a slave more and more and more. And what's really great about this? What is really great about this, Brett?
What's great about it is we see it. We've been drawn out of the world, or at least I pray you have, and you can see it for what it really is. And I could go on, but
yes, no, that's fantastic. What is great about this, Angela?
It means we're getting ready to leave Egypt.
That is exactly what it means. It means we're getting ready to leave Egypt. A mixed multitude getting ready to leave Egypt. That is exactly what it means, because that's what happened to the Israelites just before the Exodus. The pressure intensified. They were forced to make bricks without the straw. The persecution, the babies being thrown in the river. You got all of the intensity of the persecution just getting stronger and stronger, and the people crying out. And this is where you get that passage from Exodus, I think it's Exodus 10, where it says that Moses came out of a meeting with Pharaoh and went to tell the people what was going on, and they wouldn't even listen to him because it says they had shortness of spirit. Your English text will say something slightly different, like they were despondent or something like that. But in the Hebrew, it literally says they had shortness of breath, shortness of spirit, because breath and spirit is the same thing. They were enslaved, and they were getting at the end of their rope, and they were being seriously mistreated. So when you're looking around at what's happening in the world and how this small cadre of really powerful people are starting to take away your lawful rights, take away your social connections, attaching field to where it's making it harder and harder and harder for you to just eke out a living. You are joining the class of the poor, of the disadvantaged, of the ones who are being taken advantage of by those who are in control. And this is one of those things that our Father has a really hard time with. He hates it when the powerful take advantage of the less powerful, and it's becoming stronger and stronger and stronger in our society. That's how you know you're about to leave Egypt. That makes me happy. It also makes me aware of looking at those 10 judgments against the gods of Egypt. Remember how many affected the Israelites? How many affected everybody?
First 3.
The first 3 affected everybody. But at one point there was a distinction made. There was a distinction. So can you look forward to maybe having a little hedge of protection around you as things intensify? Absolutely. You need to be in Goshen. Now, that is not a physical location, by the way. You do not need to sell your house, pack your bags, and go to Oman, Jordan. You ain't going to the Nile Delta. You ain't going anywhere. Goshen is a place in the spirit world where you and the Father are at one. What? Under the shadow of his wings. This is what Goshen is. What? To what? Oh, this is all in the first handful of chapters of Exodus. Yeah. So go ahead, Jimbo.
Was it in Peter where we're told about the trumpet? When you hear the trumpet, I'm a pre-tribulation rapture guy.
You are?
Yeah.
Bite your tongue.
I am. I've worked hard.
You think Jesus is going to pull you out of the hole before the crap hits the fan, huh?
Well, he pulled Egypt out before,
No, he didn't.
Well, he got him out.
He got him out.
Yeah, it was ugly.
After 10 plagues.
Yeah, that's okay.
Now, 7 of those plagues, they had some shielding.
Okay.
But they still had to live through that stuff. I don't believe God's going to...
By the time they left, it was over.
It was over. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard the Pharaoh's court minister saying, just let them go. Don't you realize that Egypt is completely destroyed? The Israelites had to live in that destroyed place for God knows how long.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't want to go there, but what's your point?
Well, we're told that there's going to be a sound of a trumpet.
Yes.
And we're going to be raptured. Right?
Oh, that's the resurrection of the dead.
Yeah.
That's the resurrection, where you're caught up in the air to meet him in the clouds.
You don't see the
that's
trumpet.
That's Thessalonians.
You don't see the okay, good. You don't see the trumpet that takes people away.
Oh yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where is it? I'm sorry, I haven't studied in a few years. Where is it that it says one person will be needing bread?
That is Matthew chapter 25.
And what do you think that's about?
One will be destroyed and the other will remain. I don't want to be the one destroyed.
Like evaporate, like disappear.
Yeah, one is taken and the other is left.
That is a conundrum because when you
24.
look at the flood, the one who was left, it's not what.
It's the exact opposite of what you've been taught in the pre-tribulation rapture from, whatever that Left Behind series of that's fiction though, Jimbo.
Do you not see Noah and the flood when he got on the boat?
Yes.
And the world was destroyed.
Yes.
And he was taken, he floated up.
Yes.
And Enoch did the same thing.
Yes.
Enoch.
Were left behind. The ones
Yeah.
who,
Right. I'm only talking about in the Left Behind series.
no, it was the bad ones that were taken. Noah was left behind. I forget what the
Yes.
is, but it's not what it's.
Those who are taken are the ones who are wiped out and destroyed. The ones who
Okay.
are left behind are the ones who live and survive.
You don't see Enoch as a type?
Oh, absolutely.
He was the best guy alive on the planet, and he did not have to get on the boat with Noah because the year that he disappeared was the time that the flood began.
Yes.
It was the year before the flood.
Yeah,
began.
absolutely. So I
you don't
do
see him as a type of
I do.
escaping the wrath.
I think yes. The Bible is very clear that that believers are not destined to wrath.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that there is a protection and a help for prior to the Father pouring out His wrath. But remember that the wrath and the tribulation are two very different things. He said you're going to have tribulation on this planet. So
but there's also a great tribulation.
We are going to go through the great tribulation. And just before the wrath of the Father hits, you'll be rescued. Correct. But you got a bunch of crap to go through before that happens.
And do you feel at that point there'll be a trumpet that calls us up?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the last trumpet is right before the bolt of
Judgment.
wrath.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay.
So if you if you want to talk
so
about
you're a post-trib rapture guy.
Absolutely.
No,
Okay.
Mid, but not.
Well, you got to see. I think there's a distinction. There's a distinction between. There's a distinction between the great tribulation and the judgment of the Father. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
The great tribulation is caused by God basically just pulling His hands off of the situation and letting things run amok.
The principalities
His
go wild.
spirit is like, I'm getting out of here. You guys love this world and you are creating it however you want it to be. Just go ahead.
Dig it.
That's what a father sometimes does to a child who keeps demanding something that he shouldn't have. He says, fine, you go ahead. Now, so the world gets really crazy and things go horribly wrong. There are still believers on this planet who are persecuted, killed, beheaded. You know what I'm saying? You got problems. But now, this father decides, okay, you guys have had your fun. I am stepping in and I am destroying this place by fire and I'm going to set it up. Now, you're gone. You ain't going through that.
So
I think we
the
need to have that
millennium's
distinction.
coming after that.
But I apologize. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry.
And then the fire.
I'm gonna.
Right. That's what I was gonna say.
Hold on, Angela. What did you say? Give that to her, Jimbo. Give that to her so the people can hear what you said.
Is
I
the
want
fire
people-
come? The
I want
fire
the
comes
people
after the.
online to be able to hear you clarify that. Sorry, Angela's going to clarify. Sorry, and we're then we're going to get back into the street.
Something that Alan said something like fire and then the millennium, and my understanding is that the millennium and then there is the new heavens and the new earth, and so throughout the millennium,
I didn't mean. I'm sorry. I didn't mean a
nothing- it's not
recreation of
new
the
yet.
heaven and earth. I was talking about the millennium, not the recreation of the earth. So yeah, sorry, we got sidetracked on that. We're going to go to something different for a moment. How did we get to talking about the pre-tribulation rapture?
I don't know.
Jimmy did it. He's
Jimmy
always
did it.
Jimmy.
But I think it's cool that in the tabernacle there were 2 silver trumpets.
Yes.
And there's tons of shofars, but there's 2 silver trumpets. And I think the first one was blown at Sinai. It kept getting louder and louder. And I think the second one is going to be when we get called up.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know if it's before the trib or after the great
No,
trib.
yeah, that's a great insight. There's lots of wonderful things to study, and I would refer you back to our study on Matthew. That was a good discussion. I don't know if you were here at that time. I'm sure you were.
We didn't get into the rapture.
Yeah, we did.
I thought you told me like
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so I want to bring your attention back to the text. I apologize. Why would it say that isn't it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? Do you have any idea about why that might be, that these people are being dragged into court by the rich? Is this some kind of lawsuit, or is this a figure of speech? What are your thoughts on this?
They use man-made laws to exert their power on people that they want to exert their power on. They're not using Torah because the Torah isn't going to allow that. It's going to, judge by justice, and
Yep, absolutely.
you shouldn't have any sentence longer than 7 years according to Torah, and you shouldn't be. I could go on.
No,
It's what you just said. They're taking their land.
Taking the land.
It could, it's entirely possible that they're taking their land. It's also, you kind of have to think about the time period of the book of James, when it was written. Remember when we first started this study that there's a pretty good scholarly consensus that this is likely the first book of the New Testament ever written. 50 to 55 AD. This is one of the earliest writings of the New Testament. What is happening during this time period? This is about 20 years after Yeshua has been crucified. The book of Acts will tell you a little bit more about what's happening here, but consider this. Who is being dragged into the courts and beaten, thrown into jail? It's the believers of the Messiah Yeshua. Luke will tell us about this in the book of Acts, that believers in Messiah are being ripped out of the synagogues and imprisoned and beaten, and you can imagine that if you're being pulled into the Sanhedrin to answer for your heretical views, is that the rich pulling you into court? Who has control of the Sanhedrin?
Sadducees.
The Sadducees. These are the wealthy priests who have control of the legal system, and with some people from the Pharisees in there, because remember Paul, when he was in front of the Sanhedrin, noticed that there were some of them were Sadducees and some of them were Pharisees, and he pitted them against each other and got himself out of there. Remember that? He's like, brethren, yes, I'm a Pharisee, and it's because of I believe in the resurrection that I'm being persecuted. Right. They began to fight with each other. So
that perfect time, he brings up the rapture, and we start to.
So, seriously, this is, I think, perhaps what James is talking about here is believers being dragged into court and oppressed and persecuted, and where they would hear the good name of the Messiah Yeshua blasphemed in the court, where they're basically, it's just kind of like the Spanish Inquisition, in a sense. So I think that it's likely that this is what is happening in this particular passage. You guys concur? You okay with that? I want to bring your attention to one other thing. And this could be one of the reasons why when it says currying favor with the rich, treating the rich better than the poor, these people, remember that they are Jewish believers. This book was written to Jewish believers. And it's very possible that some of these believers in the Messiah were trying to go back into Judaism a little bit and maybe make some friends among those political elites to get their rights back, to get special treatment, to maybe stop the persecution. If you can make friends with the right political appointee, with somebody in the court system, some connection that you can make in politics to protect yourself from persecution. There's in a couple of chapters here, we're going to see some things that lead me to believe that that's exactly what's going on here, is that they're trying to actually protect themselves by currying favor with those in power rather than trusting in God. And, why does he start the whole book by saying, consider it all joy when you encounter various trials? This is a temptation. This is a trial. This is a testing of your faith. Are you going to turn to man to protect you? You're going to try and curry favor with some Sadducee who can maybe give you some political dispensation to protect you? Does this have any relevancy for today?
Constantine and how he just totally changed the true way,
Mm-hmm.
corrected it.
Mm-hmm. And you might be tempted, and this is especially relevant for us today, that you might be tempted to begin currying favor with some higher ups in our own society if the temperature gets turned up a little bit for you. That you might be tempted to get yourself out of the fire a little bit and say, I'm willing to make a deal. You know, who do I got to talk to? What do I got to do to get this persecution off my back?
Or what do I have to agree with?
What do I have to agree with? Yeah. What should I post on my social media account to let everybody know that I'm okay with what's going on here? You know, don't count me as some kind of weirdo.
Pressure to get the vaccine.
Pressure to get a vaccine, perhaps. Pressure to conform to some social agenda. Pressure to, do all kinds of different things in the society that you want to get away from persecution. So be prepared for these things. Be prepared for these things. I want to bring your attention just briefly. I know that we're going to wrap up here in just a moment. Take a look at Proverbs with me. Go to Proverbs verse 6.
Proverbs what?
Proverbs 6?
Verse
6, verse 6. No, excuse me. Proverbs 6 and 16. 16 through 19. You're all familiar with this passage, but I want to talk you through this last verse here. There are 6 things which Jehovah hates, yes, 7 which are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brethren. Now, what is this whole the 7 spirits of the Antichrist are on display right here. These things characterize those who oppress the poor. These are the 7 abominations which characterize those who judge the poor. Now, here's the interesting thing that I want to point out to you. Look in your Hebrew interlinear in verse 19. Notice it says one who spreads strife among brethren. So the word here for strife is kind of interesting. This is discord, medanim. This is what it says in Hebrew from the root medan. Now, notice what the actual root of this is. You can see that medan means strife or contention. But if you click on H4066, it takes you to madon. Look at the root of that. Hebrews 1777, din, judge. To act as judge, minister judgment, to plead a cause, to execute judgment. In this context, one who spreads strife among brothers is one who is chopping up the body of the Messiah into categories and pitting them against each other. Evil judgment. This is what evil judgment is. Unrighteous judgment is making a decision. This is what James has been talking about this whole section here. An unrighteous judgment. Passing judgment upon one group in favor of another group. Notice that strife, the root word of strife, is judging unrighteously. This is what causes strife among brethren, is unrighteous judgment. And so I want to just point out to you that by placing each other in categories of rich and poor, social status and all that kind of stuff, political power, in with the right people or whatever, we become judges with evil motives and we spread strife, which is one of the 7 abominations. It's the 7th abomination, which Jehovah especially hates. S7?
I'm just wondering whether the divide between Catholics and Protestants would be considered some sort of strife.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. This is one of the things that I kind of want to, and I'm going to close with this. Our society is our societies all over the world, not just in America, it's everywhere, they're fractured by social class and race and politics and denominationalism, especially in the body of Messiah. You can go and see that the body divides itself up socially. When you visit a church, you'll see some very interesting things. This is where you get some. I know that you guys have all been to various kinds of churches. You've probably been to a charismatic church, a more of a stolid, like Calvinist type church, an African American church, an African Methodist church. I've been to a couple of those. We love to divide ourselves up into people of who are alike in some way, but need to be more alike in other ways. You see what I'm saying? It's like all the people who are of a certain race or a certain personality style like to get themselves together and just divide the body of Messiah up. Could you imagine if you, back in the day, you got not a church on every corner. There's not a church on every corner. You go to the church that is in your town, and you have to get along with everyone. You have to learn to get along, black and white, rich and poor, Democrat and Republican, man and women. Unfortunately, in our society, in our spiritual society, we have divided ourselves up. We've got whole churches that are just nothing but fairly well-off people. Whole churches that are nothing but just completely poor people. The pastor's poor, the parishioners are poor, the neighborhood is poor. We have allowed ourselves to be divided up because, unfortunately, this takes us full circle back to how we started this discussion. We choose a fellowship family based upon what's in it for us. How many times have you heard people talking about, man, I went to that church, but I just didn't like the worship music. It just didn't have good music. Or the pastor wasn't, I didn't really like the way he was talking about this, or, whatever. It's almost like you don't see people thinking to themselves when they go to a church, what's going on here that I can get involved in? What can I do to make this congregation a better place? How can I serve these people? Where is my place in this fellowship? What can I do?
Where is there a spot that's lacking?
Where is there a spot that's lacking that I can serve? That does not happen. You guys, it's true because you've probably done it yourself. You know how many people have been into this little congregation that we got going here? I mean, we keep a fairly small group. But people come in, and I'm not saying everybody who comes in here should stay here, but man, we love church hopping and church shopping. It's like, I'm looking for just that thing that's going to work for me. I know you guys are all really friendly and helpful people, but some people come in here and we never see them again. They're searching for something. I don't know what it is, but I have a feeling that they haven't found it yet, and they probably won't. They're just jumping around because they're looking for what's in it for me. But if you had a heart and you had a spirit that goes to a congregation, a fellowship, and says, where's my place here? What can I do here? I know there's some place that I can serve here. It's just, man, we've gotten away from thinking about what's in it for you, not what's in it for me. That's our biggest problem. That is our biggest problem. I like the music here. I like the pastor here. I like the location. I like the atmosphere. We have no sense of how can I serve. So I just want to encourage you, again, repeatedly, you've got to be serving one another. You've got to be reaching out to one another. You can't be isolationists. Paul tells us, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together, because some of you have done and have suffered shipwreck of your faith. Now, I'm not talking to you people online who can't fellowship. We are a fairly peculiar little group of people here. You can't just find a fellowship that believes like we do on every street corner in America. So you got to take what you can get.
And we have to get along.
And we have to get along. That's yeah, that's the thing, man. We have really had to get along here. And that's what I like about this fellowship is that we have to get along, and we don't just go and say hi to each other for 5 minutes before the sermon starts on Sunday morning. We are forced to come face to face with each other. And that's not always an easy thing. And I don't always like you people. I know you probably don't always like me either. But you know what? It's the truth. You're all screwed up, just like me. But give that to Gracie, Hayden. We gotta love each other, in spite of the fact that we don't like each other sometimes. Otherwise, what good are we doing? Go ahead, Gracie.
It also is that for me and some of us friends that we have in our family that are online right now, when I go out to Maine in the summertime, which I'm not doing this year, but it's fantastic to have the group here that I can just go online and be a part still, even where I'm on the opposite side of the country. And it's a blessing because there are so few out there who believe the way we do.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to convince them that we are not looking down our noses at them.
Right.
We're just following in obedience as God is showing us.
Right.
And if you're following in obedience and believe you're in obedience, you can hardly be quiet about it.
Right. And thank you, Gracie. I appreciate that. And I want us as a little congregation here to be characterized primarily not by what we believe, by what we do, how we treat each other. Because I don't care what you believe. I mean, I do, but
Pre-trip.
you can be a pre-tribber. I don't care. Your doctrine, your belief in the fact that the Torah is valid and you should be observing Shabbat and this kind of stuff, that ain't going to save you guys. You all know that. That ain't where you're getting your salvation from. But what you do, what you say, how you behave matters. Tracy, are you frozen?
I was gonna say it in two-way street. I'm like, what?
Oh, your screen froze there for a second. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
I thought you put a cardboard cutout of yourself up there.
I better make a cute face next time. So. Anyway, I was just saying it is a two-way street though, because you were gracious when I came in, because I had been other places where I was like, I don't feel welcome here because you're calling me a Gentile, and I know that I'm not that. So it's like if you come into a congregation and saying, well, you can come, but you can't speak Hebrew here, you can't do this here, it's not welcoming. But I came to you and said, this is what I believe, is that okay with you? And you're like, that's fine. So if there's that acceptance where it's like, we believe the same thing at the core, that I feel comfortable here, I'm not feeling judged here, and that's a big problem in a lot of these bigger congregations. Judgment. They're not judging righteously.
Yeah.
And they're not making you feel like you belong there.
Yeah. No, I totally understood. Totally understood. Well, like I said, let's do the best we can to, in word and deed, be loving and demonstrate what we believe. Now, let's not just talk. Remember, I've told you guys this for years now. Demonstrate your love to the people around you and only use words when absolutely necessary. Right? Nobody wants to hear you talk. Fair enough, guys. May the Lord himself bless you. Let us pray.